On May 27th of 2023, Taliban soldiers attacked an Iranian military border checkpoint using their captured US military weapons and vehicles that were left behind during the Afghanistan withdrawal. Some internet meme lords then claimed the CIA was playing tactical 4D chess, purposely leaving behind $7 billion worth of US military equipment in order to arm the Taliban against the larger adversary of Iran. Unlikely though, because the attack is actually part of a much larger pattern of escalation between the two countries over an ongoing major water dispute. Since the Afghanistan portion of the river is on the upstream side, the Taliban now controls the flow of the river into Iran. Over 90% of Iran's 87 million people face drought conditions in 2023, which is why this conflict from their perspective is so important to their survival. So could this new battle lead to an Iranian invasion of Afghanistan? It's not that hard to imagine, because we'll see this isn't even the first time in these two's history where they've been on the brink of all-out war. But first, I created a catchy jingle to help myself remember who I can call if I ever got in an accident. Morgan & Morgan, they have over 100 offices nationwide and more than 800 lawyers with over $15 billion recovered for clients. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you a full and fair compensation. With Morgan & Morgan, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave your couch. If you've ever been injured in an accident of any kind, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. For more information, go to forthepeople.com or dial #law, that's pound 529, from your cell phone. The combat took place outside the Iranian village of Michaelides. Satellite imagery, along with ground combat footage published on Twitter, appears to reveal a Taliban attack position situated near a rocky berm just a few hundred meters from the Iranian border outpost. Video footage shows the Taliban fighters engaging with small arms weaponry, including US-manufactured M240 machine guns and M16 rifles, of which thousands were left behind in the withdrawal. In one video, we see the Taliban successfully hit one of the Iranian guard towers using what appears to be an RPG. Another video captures the Taliban fighters firing from the berm, filmed from behind the armored turret of an American up-armored Humvee. This is just one of over 22,000 Humvees left by the United States troops inside of Afghanistan. Iranian forces responded with small arms fire, mortar, and artillery fire, with some rounds possibly impacting a small Afghan village to the south of the compound. Footage indicates that the clash bled all the way into the night as both sides rushed to reinforce their positions. According to the Institute for the Study of War, social media users reported that Iran was constructing a defensive outpost which Taliban border guards tried to halt, leading to the clash. Footage of the American Humvees and MTVRs towing US-made artillery cannons were posted onto Twitter by the Taliban, with captions indicating that they were speeding to the Iranian border. Meanwhile, an Iranian helicopter circled the area, likely to provide reconnaissance and possibly fire support for their soldiers. The Iranian compound is strategically positioned directly on the border with Afghanistan, sandwiched between two roads that run parallel to the border from north to south. The surrounding landscape consists of several small villages, although the Iranian side of the border appears to be more densely populated. The fighting occurred in this relatively flat and arid terrain. Afghanistan is the much smaller nation in this conflict, by just about every metric imaginable from GDP to population. Afghanistan has 40 million people versus Iran more than double that of 87 million, so the Taliban are probably not seeking all-out war here. However, the Taliban were probably seeking to draw a line in the sand, so to speak. Irregular and guerrilla warfare remains both nations' most valuable source of power projection, not fitting for the use in conventional warfare. The regular Iranian army is estimated to have about 350,000 personnel in their ranks. Meanwhile, for context, the Taliban is estimated to have much less forces at around 80,000 fighters. However, those 80,000 were able to recapture all of Afghanistan against the 300,000 US-trained government forces after the US withdrawal, which may have also boosted the Taliban's confidence. At this point, a lot of people watching this who aren't fans of the Taliban or Iran might be relating to the words of Henry Kissinger, who once said, "It's a pity they both can't lose." By the morning of May 28, 2023, all fighting appeared to have stopped. The combat resulted in the deaths of 2 Iranian border guards, 1 Taliban fighter, and injured many more. Both Iranian and Taliban leadership publicly announced that the fighting had ended and conditions in the region returned to normal. Both sides cast blame on the other for starting the confrontation, with simple accusations that the other side shot first. So both sides made public statements that relations remain cordial, but satellite imagery tells a totally different story. A week after the conflict, imagery published online shows a Taliban buildup of the US leftover weapon systems along the disputed border region with Iran. On June 9th, the Taliban conducted military exercises along the border as a direct show of force. But what geopolitical considerations brought Iran and the Taliban to blows in the first place? Water is at the core of this historical conflict. The majority of the residents in the region are agriculture workers who rely on the southward flow of water from Helmand's river. So we need to understand that the division between Afghanistan and Iran was originally marked by a border drawn by a British officer in the 1870s. You could make the argument that the borderline was arbitrary or randomly drawn without considering the consequences to either side. There's also evidence that both nations have failed to cooperate in managing this resource effectively. The borders drawn by Sir Mortimer Durand unintentionally left one country, Iran, hopelessly dependent on the water cooperation of its unstable neighbor Afghanistan. Iran and Afghanistan actually don't have any major territorial disputes, but the disagreement over the allocation of water is a major disagreement that could lead to war. Iran cares deeply about its access to the water from the Helmand. The negotiations for a water-sharing treaty actually began in 1939, but were not officially ratified until 1973. According to the terms of this agreement, when we look at it, Iran is entitled to 850 million cubic meters of water annually from the Helmand River. However, the geopolitical landscape of Afghanistan has undergone dramatic transformations since the signing of the treaty in the early 1970s. For example, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and it was at this point that Iran was put in an uncomfortable position. The Soviet invasion next door to them created a major problem for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Khomeini felt it was necessary for him to speak out against the Soviet invasion of a fellow Islamic country by what he called godless communists. But at the same time, he actually couldn't really afford to directly stand up to the Soviet Union. So Iran would condemn the Soviets' actions while refusing to create any real policies that would hurt the Soviets. Then, after the Soviet withdrawal, the Taliban took control in 1995, and Iran saw them as a major threat right from the beginning. History shows Iran has good reason to worry. The Taliban government of Afghanistan blocked the Kajiki Dam and choked off water to Iran from 1998 to 2001, a period that also included one of the region's worst droughts. This is because in August 1998, Taliban troops stormed the Iranian consulate in Afghanistan and killed 8 Iranian diplomats, 1 Iranian journalist, and held 50 other Iranian nationals hostage. Iran then ordered 200,000 of their soldiers to the border with Afghanistan and began to hold meetings on whether or not they should invade Afghanistan. This is how close we came to war between the two nations. At the last minute, war was avoided thanks to the United Nations, brokering a deal where the Taliban agreed to return the bodies of the diplomats that they murdered and release their Iranian hostages. However, Iran never forgot how this incident was seen as a national humiliation to them at home. After the US took control of the country in 2001, the Iranians were again put in a strange position where the enemy of their enemy became their friend. During Ashraf Ghani's presidency under the American occupation, we saw Afghanistan build a few new dams, such as the Solomon Dam across the Haredi River and the Kamala Khan Dam across the Helmand River. A historian with links to the Taliban named Mustafa Hamid claimed that this dam was designed specifically by the American government in order to complicate future relations between Iran and Afghanistan, and actually had no benefit to the people of Afghanistan. This shows how skeptical the Taliban is of even positive developments that came from the US occupation. Throughout the US occupation, the Iranian government armed the Taliban with funds and weapons against US soldiers, but General David Petraeus told the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2010 what was really happening. He said, quote, "They want to provide enough assistance to the Taliban so that they make life difficult for us and others, but not so much that they might actually succeed. After the 2021 withdrawal of US forces, the Taliban are now back in business. The only signed legislation guaranteeing Iran access to the important water has now passed through 4 violent changes in their neighbor's government, and as a result, the agreement isn't aging all that well. To maintain access to the water, Iran turned to their most effective foreign policy tool, gray zone operations. In 2018, when India funded local projects to create more hydroelectric dams, Iran paid the local Taliban to disrupt construction. Before this, poor land management on both sides antagonized the desperate situation. Both countries have continued to build dams and dig wells without environmental surveys, diverted the flow of water, and planted crops not suitable for the changing climate. In an effort to decouple from Western agricultural products, Iran began planting water-intensive crops not suitable for the landscape, like sugarcane. By 2018, the culmination of these efforts led to one of the worst droughts in the region, and things have not gotten better since then. Iran's president has tried warning the Taliban to abide by the 1973 Water Treaty. Other key Iranian leaders also voiced their frustrations publicly over Afghanistan's lack of water distribution since the Taliban takeover. On the other hand, Taliban responses remain mixed. Popular Taliban General Mobin posted a video on Twitter where he was trolling President Raisi by offering him a gallon of water and saying, "Please don't attack us, we're terrified." Other Taliban leaders responded by saying that there's no water to give. Even if they opened the Kajiki Dam, nothing would reach Iran. But there's more to this issue than you might think. After the US left Afghanistan, all incentive for replacing the more lucrative poppy cultivation for alternative crops left with them. For many years, Afghanistan has been the world's largest opium producer, and Iran has been the main transit route for Afghan opium to Central Asia and Europe. This problem has aggravated Iran's #1 social problem, opiate addiction. Typically, opium requires less water than other traditional crops, making it more viable for an already water-scarce region. The current drought conditions facing Afghan farmers, coupled with lax drug enforcement and no other alternatives to make money, reinforces the Atlantic Council's 2022 findings that opium production in the Southwest is on the rise. Iran is a major highway for landlocked Afghanistan to get its illegal products to the market. As a result, Iranians are suffering from a new level of opioid crises similar to the one the United States is facing with Chinese fentanyl. In response, Iranian authorities along the border are getting serious about cracking down on drugs. In the first 8 months of Taliban rule, border guards seized 103 tons of drugs coming from the same region that the fighting took place, southeast Iran. In my opinion, this is the most likely reason for the violence. While Iran wants to enforce their borders to keep Afghan heroin out, the Taliban are incentivized to keep drug corridors open, so drugs can flow out and cash can flow in. This is why when Iranians began construction to harden their border, local Taliban, with some skin in the drug game, decided to fight back. Drugs, guns, and sketchy criminal terrorist organizations are enough to cause some to allege that the CIA is playing 4D chess here. In reality, the CIA is probably laughing at those who thought that they had anything to do with this. Instead, a combination of old tensions and new conditions came together to create an escalating case of border violence, crescendoing in Taliban soldiers using American firepower to turn an Iranian border checkpoint into the Alamo. Iran is a self-styled Shia revolutionary regime, while the Taliban are fundamental Sunni Muslims. These two competing forms of Islam are often at the center of ethnic conflict in the region. While both of these groups occasionally came together over a shared hatred of the United States, now that common enemy is gone. How long will it take for these two frenemies to become full-blown enemies? This incident came as the culmination of a year marked by protests from Iranian farmers due to water scarcity. Over the last year, Iran has struggled to quell violent, widespread protests within their own nation. Protests began over women's rights, but quickly expanded to cover grievances against the government corruption. Attacks from the Taliban along its border are in part a welcome distraction for the Iranian regime. This escalating violence also sends a powerful message to the people of Iran: it could be worse, we are the only ones protecting you from a Taliban invasion. If you guys have another minute, I think you'll really enjoy this video I just made about the atrocities happening in China's Xinjiang region. We dive deep into the geopolitical reasons for the unrest happening there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again real soon.